Welcome to Seekonk Speedway's 75 Seasons of Speed podcast. This is a walk back in time with a few of our favorites celebrating the history of racing at Seekonk Speedway. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of 75 Years of Speed, a podcast where we go back in time and take a walk through the history of the action track of the Seekonk Speedway. And today we're joined by 7-time Pro Stock Series champion at the action track of the East, Mr. Dave Darling. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Dave, congratulations on your seventh title this year. Knowing that your team has always been prepared week after week, seeming to be at the top of your game when the light turns green in the spring, does that ever take away any of the excitement, or do you wake up in the beginning of April, the beginning of May on opening day and just have a big smile on your face and say, let's go get another one?
I think it depends. Year to year is always different. We've had some dry spells throughout the years. I've been teamed up with Gary and Ronnie since 2003, I believe. And we've been doing it, ever since, pretty much every week. And with Gary and Ronnie, Gary Johnson and Ronnie Pond, Gary was the car owner for a long time and still is part car owner. But over the last 4 years or so, my dad and I have bought some new cars and bought some equipment and moved the shop back to Seekonk and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a 3-person pronged ownership effort, and has allowed us to get a little bit upgraded resources and some stuff like that. So for years it was Gary doing it with Ronnie Pond, kind of the head of it all. And Ronnie's old school and been racing there for, eons, and knows how to make a homegrown, home-built car, if you will, go. And as the technology's kind of, and he's gotten older, he's in his 70s, there was a point where it was evolving to where, and he even said to me, he says, geez, I don't want to learn new tricks. Like, I know what I know. And, it's gotten to a point where, I have no issues banging out dents and fixing bumpers and doing this because I love doing it and need something to do. And he says, but the new way of racing and the type of speed we need and the technology, or it's not even so much technology, it's just knowledge of the new way of doing things. He says, I don't care to learn it. And so we brought Jeff in a few years ago, and he's really kind of spearheaded the effort the last 3 years with the championships and running up front. And he's, in a way, a younger version of Ronnie. He's dedicated, wants to win, is very hungry, wants to win every race. Every race he shows up with, working on a car, he shows up with the assumption he and the team that he goes there with, whether it's myself or Ranstrom or Angelo when he was helping Angelo, he expects the team to compete for the win every night. And he's going to give you the best car possible he can every night, and then it's up to the driver and the rest of the team to kind of make it work. And so the dedication that Ron has put in since teaming up with us in 2003, it's a lot of time, a lot of effort. The races are won over the winter in the garage, putting the time and the effort in to get the cars prepared. And Ronnie was volunteer. In other words, he didn't want to get paid and didn't get paid. And he brought some of his own parts and pieces and went to flea markets and pieced things together. And when we needed stuff, and, does a lot of homemade type of stuff on the car, can kind of make anything out of metal on a lathe and Bridgeport and stuff. So there's a lot of work in the off seasons that goes in behind the scenes, and Ronnie and Jeff do a ton of it. And I've been down there for years as well, but don't nearly do as much as they have and never have. And nor I don't love working on the cars. I do. I know how. I can do most of anything, but by no stretch of the imagination can I make the car go like they can, or could I ever. And so, with the family getting older and the kids getting bigger and doing more sports and stuff, usually in April and May, it's tough to kind of go racing in the sense that, I'm leaving on a Saturday morning, a soccer game or a deck hockey game or whatever it is to go get the race car ready. And so I'm trying to juggle working on the car on Tuesday nights or whatever night of the week we need to work on it, plus practice on a Saturday or going racing on a Saturday. So, my daughter did dance for years. I missed probably every recital except for one that happened to fall on a rain out. I did go to the rehearsals every Friday for the years that she did dance, but I wasn't able to make any of the 10 years I think she did it, one on a rain out. So you miss a lot of those things. So it's really a catch-22. It's a very selfish sport in the sense you do it for yourself and you do it to compete. And I love speed and I like to drive. I love to drive the race cars, but it's kind of pointless to own the cars to just drive them. So, you might as well race them. That's the whole idea and the competitive aspect of it. And so it's a unique sport where I think it was Hooley told me best when I was, 17 or 18. He says you can be a hero one day and a zero the next day. And there's no truer truth to that. One week you can win and the next week you can, lose massively. And so you can be on top of the mountain and then at the bottom of the mountain within a week or even in the same race. So it's a very complex sport and it can drive emotions high and low and everywhere in between within a matter of seconds and or minutes. So there's a lot to it. I mean, I'm always eager to get on the track in the spring and always eager to, see what we have and nervous too. You never know, if what you've done all winter long is going to work or not, and how well it's going to work. And then once the season gets going, it's kind of, a little bit more of a routine and things like that. So it's definitely to a degree kind of a give and take, if you will, where you're missing some things, but at the same token, my kids love to go. And my daughter's probably, one of the biggest fans, if not my biggest fan I have. And over the years, I've even said to her as 4 or 5 years ago, if you guys want me to stop racing so I don't miss these things, you let me know and I'll stop. And both her and my son Bennett, and at the time I don't think Lucas was born yet, they're like, no, we love watching you go race. And they do, and they don't generally miss a week. And if they do, it's occasional. And Sophie is in her element when she's there watching me race, and just she knows probably more drivers in every division than I do, their names and what car they drive and the number that they're in and what happened. And she can tell you a race just as well as I can by watching it. So she's a definite race fan of the sport. Loves going to races to watch with my dad. And she's gone to Beach Ridge with me before, watched Derek Ranstrom win the 300. And so that in the last probably 5 to 10 years is the reason that I'm still doing it, is because they've become fans and like to see me race and, obviously love to see me do well. And so I think that's kept me in the sport even longer because sometimes the guilt of missing their things makes that May jump off for the season a little more difficult to get ramped up for.
Now, when you were younger, going to the track watching your dad, and I know you didn't do a lot of racing, but he did some. Did you ever think that you would be behind the wheel of a race car tooling around?
I bugged him for years and years and years to get me in a quarter midget, and I remember him racing. I don't remember him ever racing at Seekonk. The only relative I remember racing at Seekonk was my grandfather. He went out in a Cobra against Mike Greenwell in like a little spec race. Mike Greenwell, I think, was in one of Vinny's Pro Stocks. And he went out there, and Mike Greenwell was doing some laps, and he wasn't supposed to. We got in big trouble for it from the Red Sox. And my grandfather was out there in a 429 Cobra, and Eddie Veter from Bristol Toyota, his son was with him. And then I think Eddie Veter or somebody from the Bristol Toyota was in an MR2 out there. And I watched my grandfather loop the thing going down into one, did a complete 360, came out of the smoke and kept going. And I was like jumping on my feet, up and down, because I never really saw or remember my dad or my grandfather ever racing, and to me it was like the coolest thing to see, because I've watched Rick Martin growing up my entire life. He'll get dumped or spun out and he'll do a 360 and keep on going, and I've tried doing it and I've only pulled it off a few times. So it's a move of an extremely talented driver to be able to do that and keep going, and so to see my grandfather do it when I've only seen other race car drivers do it, and him do it with no helmet and barely, probably, I don't even know if he had his seatbelt on, was I was jumping up and down as a kid going, that's my grandfather, So my dad, he was road racing when I grew up, but he stopped probably when I was like 7 or 8. I only went to a handful of races. I don't really remember them a ton. I do remember being at a couple and just being in the infield, and you couldn't see a lot at the road courses. And so I knew the lineage to a degree, seeing some pictures and stuff like that. And then probably when I was 7 or 8, I started going to Seekonk every week. My dad had the Grand Prix going, and he would take me there every week, and that would kind of be our thing. And I'd get there at like 4 o'clock, and then he'd go in the pits, and I'd sit at the wall over between 3 and 4. And at some points, I'd sneak in the pits here or there before they put a little bit more pavement over there. I could kind of like crawl underneath the little gate there that they have. And I'd go walk around the pits and talk to Vinny and talk to, see Rick. But I'd really go talk to Vinny because my dad knew Vinny, raced with Vinny. And then Ron Pond was there with John Tripp, and Jimmy Wilkins was there. And, some of those guys. So we kind of chit-chat. And at the time, Ronnie had his cars over at the warehouse where I have my cars across the street from the Speedway, and he had 3 cars. He had an orange one, a baby blue one, and a yellow one. And he had, I don't remember Gomer in them, but Gomer was there racing at the time, and a few other guys. Then across the street was Eastern Insulation. Dickie, I think, was his name, and he had Bugsy driving his pro stock. And now all these guys would go to Alex's family restaurant Saturday morning. So what did my dad do? My dad picked me up. We'd go to Alex's like 8, 9 o'clock, and we'd see Dickie there and Ron Pond and a bunch of other guys that were there, and Bobby Blanchett and his brother-in-law, and all guys my dad knew. And then we go down the shop, and Ronnie and John Tripp, and I think Sprague drove for him at one point. Jimmy Wilkins had his car in there at one point, and they'd all be down there, and they'd have go-karts. They'd go and drive in the dirt out there and all that other stuff. So, I mean, I was around racing even when my dad wasn't racing, for a majority of my life, because my dad loved racing, and even when he wasn't racing, he was still around it. And then when the Formula 4s kind of came in, my dad got involved in those. My cousin raced those a little bit, Eric Snow. And I think before he raced, though, my dad got friendly with a guy, Bill Benz, who did VW engines, and Doug Henson drove for him, and then Bob Blanchett drove the Formula 4s, and my dad was friendly with Bob Blanchett from Ronnie and all them. And so I was around that part of racing for a while. And then when my cousin started, I was probably 13 or somewhere in there, probably 13, 14. And he started racing Formula 4s, and I helped Bill Benz build a VW engine at least went down there, I think, a couple nights, and we put an engine together just so he could show me kind of how to build a motor, and using Wins lubricants and from Wally Saliba, And so knew a lot of the players, knew a lot of people, grew up watching. I was on the tail end of Bugsy's career. I don't remember Leo Cleary running there, but I remember Fred Estelle in the 48. I remember sitting in turn 4 and watching Fred put that thing about an inch off the wall every lap coming out down the front straightaway, and just the right rear just hazing down the front straightaway every lap after lap after lap, just the right rear just hazing off of that thing. And watching Rick in the 2 New England Tech car, and watching Tony Dias and in the cars. And so I mean, I grew up watching the pro stocks in their heyday in the 90s, watching Ed St. Angelo and Vinny in his car. And so I mean, I wanted to go racing from the time I can remember. And I remember Bob Tripp, when he bought Vinny's car, and he was in the 88 New England Sanitation, and then Billy Manchester ended up with that car. And that car won no matter who had it. You know, Vinny won a ton of races, and Bob Tripp won a championship and some races in it. Billy Manchester won some races in that car. And I just remember watching the line and watching what these guys were doing. And then the trucks came about, and my dad got involved with Rick Harris of, I think, Northeast Auto down on 44, and Billy Clark. And they put a truck together, the first prototype of I don't know what they're, the trucks at the time, the 4 cylinders. And my grandfather drove it either 2 or 3 times, I think, and won, 2 or 3 times in it. I mean, it started out with only a handful of trucks. And then once I got to, what we felt was of age, the track didn't feel the same. And we built the truck, and that's how I got into racing. That was my first foray into racing of any kind. I never did any go-karts or anything like that. So I was supposed to be 18, but I was 16 at the time. And we put a truck together. My dad's thought process was, if you want to go racing, and I was very cheap. I didn't like spending any money. I'd go to work for him and take cash and kind of hoard it, and really didn't want to part with any because I wanted to buy a car when it came time to drive. And he says, listen, we'll go racing, but I need to know you're serious. And the only way I got to know that is you need to put some money in. So I'll pay for the motor. Nat built the motor, and my father said, you pay for the truck to be built. And he found it. I don't know how he found Danny Fournier to build the truck, but he did. And that's who built our first truck. And I did really well in it, and first time out, didn't, 16 years old, figure I know what I'm doing. I got this down pat, and I go out there and come back in, and I go, how'd I do? And they go, great, if you're racing in the third groove.
Now, after a short period of time, you moved out and into the pro stock, but you also did some Bush North racing too. What was that experience like?
That was tough. Those, the cars are big and heavy and 150 laps, and we never really did very well. I never really did very well in them for whatever reason. I was in college at the time, and my dad spent a lot of money over the years for us to go racing, and I think to some degree we were outmatched with equipment, we were outmatched with amount of crew, and not that our crew didn't work hard and really put a great effort, because that's the same crew that went on to win the tour championship with Dub Kobe, so modified tour championship. So I think it was just a matter of you needed like a full-time body guy, and then so there's a lot of time spent putting bodies back together and tin and Bondo and paint and all that. And we did well when they were on American Racers, and they switched over to Goodyears, and we really just lost a lot of speed once they did that. And then eventually Jerry Marquis ended up, I was in a hotel and gotten married, and so I told my dad, I said, he says I got fired, but it's kind of was mutual, I guess. I said, I'll race a few races and you can have somebody else get in the car. And so they put Jerry Marquis in it, and he did all right, but about the same as I would, 15th or 20th place from what I can remember. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but they ended up buying a down south car. So kind of the same type of cars everybody else was running. At the time, we had some Shaw cars, and, I think just the tire combination with the stuff that he had going on. And that was when the changeover was happening from conventional big spring setups to big bar stop spring setups. And so I think we were kind of I was caught in the middle of that. And, it was once you got a business going and you graduate college and was getting married and stuff like that, it just wasn't working. The dynamic of it and all wasn't really working. And so traveling and things like that, it was a good experience. I raced with Martin Truex Jr., who obviously we know bigger and better things. It was a lot of money to kind of keep pace with those guys at the time, and my dad was doing the best he could with it and spending a lot of money, but not nearly spending as much as some of those other guys, and that had 2-3 full-time guys working on their cars at the time. And maybe I'm not the best at traveling around to different tracks and figuring things out and trying to make it work, but I definitely wouldn't look back on it and say it was like a successful experience. We had a few good runs here and there. I did like road courses. I had a lot of fun at the Watkins Glen and Lime Rock. caught on fire up at Loudon in pretty spectacular fashion. So I can say that Loudon was like an ideal track. I mean, we ended up going back once they instituted restrictor plates because I did race there times after that, but we did better with the restrictor plates, which makes me feel like we were down. Maybe we didn't have the best horsepower combo or things. And, and looking back on it, there's a lot of things that over the years I learned differently about how to do things too. I mean, I was young and I think probably much better racer now than I was then. And so it's tough. You're wrecking the thing every week, not trying to, just back there with the, back in the 20th or something spot and 15th spot and get caught up in a mess or make a mess or whatever the case may be. And so rather than making them go faster, you're kind of putting it back together. So we ended up doing a partial schedule. We never did full schedule on the Bush North stuff, and still cost, I think, a good amount of money for my dad. So money, I'm sure, looking back on it, helped me become a better racer, but I think I would, probably we should have waited a few more years before we went off on that route.
2003 comes around, you're coming back to Seekonk, you don't really have a little pro stock, and you get together with Gary Johnson and Ronnie Pond. Now, I've known Gary for a long time, but I think this was his first real foray in car ownership at Seekonk. How did all that come about?
Oh, it's interesting. Like, I think the only reason we ended up going Bush North racing was because my dad felt modifieds were too dangerous. And from a father standpoint, he didn't want to put me in a modified. I think he liked modifieds, and that's how he ended up going modified racing later on with his team. But he really didn't want to put me in a modified. And my grandfather at the time didn't even want me racing because I was working and making the family businesses go. And so what kind of came about is my dad was instrumental with Ronnie and wanted to, I think he wanted to keep me racing because he knew I liked doing it, and I do love doing it. And so I talked to him about, hey, do you think Ronnie would be interested in doing anything? And Ronnie at the time was helping Lenny, but his father just passed away, and he had, I think he had stopped and saw my dad and had talked about how he had a car, and he had heard that I wasn't driving for my dad anymore, and said, maybe we can get something together. And so we ended up talking to Ronnie and getting something together. And I always knew of Ronnie's stuff as being, home built, like good stuff, and it always went well. But at the time, I'm thinking, boy, geez, I know this car for sale because John McKenna had a Howe dealership, and we had run Howe cars for years. And even though we were doing the Bush stuff, he was still putting cars together for Seekonk. And so Brian Souza had a car built by Furnace and Duct. Furnace and Duct ended up sponsoring my dad's car. They became my grandfather and the guy that owns John Henry that owns Furnace and Duct, and my dad kind of all became a little bit friendly, and had put some money into the race teams at different points. So I know there's cars available to be bought. And so I'm going, well, geez, Dad, what do you think? And Dad's like, yeah, I got my own race team. I can't really go spend some more money over here. And Gary and I had known each other because he did the landscaping at the Grand Prix. When we built the mini golf course at the Grand Prix, I don't even know when, back in the 90s, Fantasyland down the road had really nice landscaping. And at the time, the Grand Prix, I used to mow the lawns, ride on a lawnmower and a weed whacker and everything else. And I had said to my dad, I said, listen, I think we need to get that guy down there, whoever did doing the landscaping, to landscape this mini golf course. And I said, you know what, it might be worthwhile to have them cut the place because they do a better job than I can do, and then any of your guys can do it. It wasn't just me cutting the lawns. We had other guys working for us that would do it too, my dad and stuff. So he ended up making the decision to bring Gary in to landscape the golf, but then also had Gary start doing the maintenance on all the Grand Prix, the grass cutting and the trimming. And obviously it looks a lot better than when we were doing it. And just because that's what they do and better equipment, and that's his business, He does a great job. And so we used to talk at the mini, like when he'd come and do the Grand Prix, and we get talking. He's just like, oh, I remember you racing the truck, and you used to do really well in it. I remember you won a bunch of races. And Gary at the time, I guess, must have either raced or was going to the track, and he knew Jerry DeCasperi and a bunch of people from the track. So he was a race fan, and I never knew he was. And so we got talking, and he says, you ever want to do anything, let me know. If you ever, I was racing Bush North. So I get done with the Bush North deal and going to stay local, and got the Hampton going and stuff, and got that being built and finished up. And I saw Gary and I said, hey, I got an idea. I said, you're still interested in getting into racing? I said, I need some sponsorship to get a car. And he says, well, if I'm going to sponsor a car, I'd just as soon own it. I said, oh, really? Well, I know where there's a car to be bought. And so that's how kind of it came about. I was originally approached him as getting money to use Ronnie's car. But he's like, if I'm going to put money into a car, I'd rather own the car. And so then we get talking, and he says, well, I don't have a trailer, I don't have tools, I don't know what I'm doing. I said, well, I got Ronnie Pond coming to help, and he knows how to make the cars go, and we were going to use all his stuff anyway, so I'm sure we could just kind of use his stuff with your car. Now, Ronnie has no cell phone, so you can't get a hold of Ronnie, and trying to get a hold of him at his house is like shooting darts at the dartboard. So Ronnie ends up showing up one day, and I'm like, oh, here's a car, here's Gary, we're going to go racing together. That's kind of how it worked. And so it was, completely blindsided Ronnie with it by every stretch of the imagination. And it was just like, listen, it'll work good, and I knew Gary from a working relationship, but Gary's a great guy, and he's a good guy, and it was definitely, I was the monkey in the middle for a lot of years between them making it work, and Ronnie, I got to give him a lot of credit and Gary too, for those two never even knowing each other and being okay with it. And they were okay with it because I was involved and because of me, there's a lot of trust back and forth. And then there was a lot of expectations back and forth. And I think for Ronnie, there was probably more pressure on Ronnie than I ever realized for him to feel like he needed to produce because he was working on somebody else's car, and somebody else's car that, is like, I'm spending the money and we need to be able to, there was more pressure for Ronnie than I ever realized, I think. And over the years, I realized more and more kind of the pressure he had felt and put on himself, really, because I didn't ever feel like, I know how racing works. Sometimes you go good and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you figure it out and sometimes you can't, but I think for Gary, we started off really well, and he just, once you get that mojo going and you start doing really well, it's, well, what happened? Why can't we get back? And Gary never did anything or never said anything, or always gave us what we kind of needed. He'd level with us. Hey, do we really need that? And Ronnie won't spend any money, let alone somebody else's money. So we were able to go racing on a very limited budget, and it worked for Gary because most years the car would make a little bit of money, and he'd take the money that the car made and put it back into the car the following year, whether it was a motor rebuild or upgrading some parts and pieces and stuff like that, and it just got to the point for Gary where we had cars we were running that were, built in the 90s, and we needed to upgrade the cars, and for him to spend, $50,000 to buy a new car, it really isn't in his budget. So that's how my dad and myself got more involved the last 4 or 5 years. So.
Did you ever, when you first got together, did you ever big dream? I mean, all racers dream big, but did you ever dream about the success that you've actually had?
No. And I attribute a lot of it really to Ronnie and Gary because, listen, from day one, they both believed in what I could do, probably more so than I thought I could do. And, I think the two of them saw more in me than I saw in myself in a lot of ways. And I know Ronnie can make cars go. I've seen him go with Johnny Tripp. And, years ago, I heard the stories about him with George Murray and stuff like that, winning all kinds of races in the modifieds, and even him building his own cars and racing himself. And I feel like he and I worked really well together to a degree. Listen, Ronnie's the type of guy that does a lot of yelling usually, and so is Gary, and so it's sometimes could be kind of comical, and then other times it can be really frustrating and aggravating. And I'm sure all three of us have walked out and quit at numerous points. And I remember early on, and Ronnie to me is kind of a father figure in a way, where put him at a racetrack and you put him outside a racetrack and he's one of the most charismatic people you ever talk to. He is funny. He's a great storyteller, but he is really a good, really, really good guy. And he doesn't want you to know that, but he really is. And he's a great person, great with people. And Gary is too. Gary looks miserable the whole time, but honestly, he's probably got one of the biggest hearts of anybody I know, and will do anything for anybody and give you the shirt off his back. And that's just the way he is, And So I think you just take three people where none of us really drink and party, and none of us really, you know, care to do any of that stuff, and in their own right are all successful in what they do. And Ronnie was a school teacher, and a really good school teacher. Anybody that had him really loved having him in school. And Gary's successful businessman with his landscaping business, and then I'm kind of born into a successful business family, and have been able to kind of continue on. And, you know, I think we knew we could do well, but I don't think we ever envisioned being able to do what we've done. And you know, there's been lots of good times, I feel, in all of it. I mean, Ronnie's worked with me now for, I guess, what are we on, year 17 or something? And, you know, I think Charlie Rose at one point was like, you know, he's never stayed with anybody longer than 5 years, you know, helping people out, and whoever drove for him or whatever the case may be. And we've had our battles, you know. I wouldn't want anybody else helping me on my cars. I wouldn't want anybody else helping me, you know, putting their name on the side of the car other than Ronnie and Gary. And, you know, bringing Jeff in was, Jeff had worked for Gary at different points and knew Gary, and so that made that transition a little bit easier. But with the Ronnie and Jeff transition, you know, everybody has their own way of doing things. And Jeff, I call Jeff my mini Ronnie, because the way he is and his competitiveness reminds me of Ronnie's competitiveness. And I had never been around anybody as competitive as Ronnie in my life until I went and started working with Ronnie. And, you know, and I love it because I understand it. It comes from a place of passion. It comes from a place of, you know, his anger and or his, you know, sometimes his spite that he might spew is a place from passion, because he's putting his heart and soul into what he's doing. And if he feels like somebody else isn't, he's going to let him know about it, you know, and he's going to let you know point blank. And to me, it's always been something that, you know, you kind of work with. And for me, it's like, you know, once he lost that passion or loses that passion, it's like, well, now he just doesn't care. And if any one of us kind of got to that point, it's like, hey, we got to go in a different direction, because I feel like anger to a degree can be a sign of passion if manifested and directed in the right sort of way. And it always usually was. It wasn't manifested in like, I don't like type of way. It was manifested in like, hey, get your head out of your butt and, you know, make some better decisions, because, you know, we're going racing and I put a lot of time and my energy into this, so we got to make it work. And that was the way Ronnie always was. And I remember at one point building, what was I doing? The shocks, I had bought shocks for the car, and they weren't right, and he's telling me what he wants, but he doesn't really know, and I don't really know. I'm not a shock guy. This was back in, you know, 2005, and I'm trying to make him do what he wants to do, and he, you know, he has a way of getting his point across. He's like, I want to go in and out like this, like super fast, like a polo stick. And I'm like, okay. And I got shock oil all over him. He's screaming and yelling. I look at him and go, listen, I go to work all day and I get yelled at by my grandfather. I don't need to come down here and get yelled at too. So you can talk to me and we can talk. If you want to yell, I'm just going to leave and come back when you're done yelling. And, you know, and that's kind of how it works. And there's been times I got excited at him and I was mean to him. And, you know, the next day, you know, I think I pointed my glasses at him and I was like, here, you take my glasses, you drive the car, you know. And he was pretty hurt and upset by it. And the next time we go down the shop, he's like, listen, he says, I don't want to be in that pit area with anyone else driving a car other than you. But I need to know you only want me working on it, and then we can both go forward. And so we had a conversation, and, you know, and it's completely accurate. And the crew chief has to have trust in the driver has to have trust in the crew and the crew chief. And, you know, without it, if one of them starts questioning the other, then just the dynamic of it kind of falls apart. And so I feel like, you know, for years that we've been able to maintain that, and then Jeff's been able to bring in a fresh set of eyes and understanding and knowledge of these new super late models, if you will, and how they work. And even with the rule changes at Seekonk, to try to take out some of the bump stomps and things like that, Jeff's just, you know, really on top of it and smart and understands a lot of things and how the dynamics of the cars work nowadays. Like I said, he's kind of a mini Ronnie. His attention to detail and making sure that the cars are prepared and ready to go each and every week. And Ronnie was the same way. I've never had a part failure or anything like that with either one of them. You know, it's just different. They do it a little differently in the way they do it, and their thought processes are very similar. They want the same results. They expect to win every week they show up.
Let's go back a little bit and I don't know if you can remember, but take me through the first time you were getting ready to jump behind the wheel of the truck. First time out on the track. Remember what you were feeling like? Whether it was scared, whether it was excitement, whether it was what the heck am I getting myself into? What was the mind thought there, waking up that morning and that day?
I was always excited, but yeah, you're fearful too. I mean, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a degree of fear. Not as much at Seekonk. Seekonk, you get a little more nervous because you want to do well and you don't want to mess up. Thompson's definitely a place where you're thinking about the speed and how fast it goes, and and it's a thought that crosses your mind before you get out there. Loudon, Watkins Glen, places like that. The first time, I can't remember if the first thing I ever drove. I think the first thing I ever drove was a truck, but I drove a strictly stock, or whatever they're called, at Thompson at one point. And I don't remember if it was before the truck or during the truck, but before I raced the truck, I had to go to racing school. It's kind of one of the things they said I needed to do to be able to jump into the truck versus a Formula 4. So I went out to Bob Bondurant and did a school out there with my cousin Eric, and we had a blast. It was a good time. And I remember my dad, it was during the Copper World Classic, and I remember my dad flew in, and we were going to the Copper World Classic because the school was like 3-4 days, and then after that was the Copper World Classic down at Phoenix. And so my cousin and I went there, and like the first day we strap in, they put you in a 12-passenger van and take you out on this road course, and they got BF Goodwrenches on it and some BBS wheels, and the thing's hopping around, turning. And the instructors, showing you the course and where to do things. So that was really my first time behind a car. It was really my first time driving a standard was out there too. And you learn how to heel toe downshift, and you're learning about acceleration and braking and tire patches and all of those things. So that was, for me, a huge learning experience to be able to translate into anything I drove later on in life. And so down there, being in the learning environment and stuff like that, you first hop in a car with an instructor, and then the instructors gets in with you, and they really start like you know nothing. Honestly, I didn't know anything. Barely knew how to drive a stick shift at that point. And so, I was 16 at the time, and so I don't even know if I had a driver's license when I went out there. And it was a lot of fun. They had Ford Mustangs, Saleen Mustangs, and then they had these they call them Formula Fords, which are like little Indy cars with the rear engines. And we were racing those things in the rain at one point, and they had the last day they had little races in the Formula Fords, and we were doing the Formula Fords. You're only allowed to pass in certain sections of the track, and I thought a guy, if the other people on the track waved you by, you could pass them. And so I thought this guy waved me by, and it turns out he didn't, because all of a sudden he started coming down, and I ended up running over a couple cones and going through the grass because they had cones set up to show you where the apex of the turn was. And so it was clash from style and then go out and do it on the track. And so the guy comes in the pits, and I'm 16. He's screaming at me. He's a guy with a beard and glasses, and he's yelling at me, calling me every name in the book. And I'm like, whoa. So the instructors end up pulling him out, and they were going to toss him out of the class because you're not supposed to have that kind of conduct. And they were asking me what happened. I said, I thought he waved me by because he was way outside the mark where you're supposed to hit to get to the apex. And he had no idea I was there, but they ended up apologizing, and I think I told him that he could stay, whatever it was. But that was my first incident, if you would, in racing, with many more to come. And but it was one of those where, it was, I was just gung-ho, and 16, thought I knew everything, thought I knew more than anybody else. Every 16-year-old does. I know, Kevin, you have kids, so you understand. And, I was no different. Yeah. I was no different. And my grandfather used to call me smart mouth, and so took that and went into the trucks. And then I think I'm 90% sure the first time I went out on the truck, I was in like the third groove. And my dad's like, I said to Danny Fournier, because Danny Fournier had Bob Stockel working for him. And so Bob Stockel, I think, were driven a pro stock or a few years earlier, and for years had been racing at the track. And so Danny had worked with Dick Houlihan when they ran Dick Houlihan and Johnny McKenna, and they ran the Formula Pro 4s, and they won championships in that. So for Danny, building the truck was like bringing him back to when he built the Pro 4 way back when with the leaf springs and stuff like that. And so the truck went really, really well. We won, I think, by the time we got it out on the track. So we had Danny had built the truck took the truck back to my shop. I know nothing about race cars. I don't know how to work on them. My dad had a couple guys that used to help him that kind of went down and helped. And I mean, I'd been around my cousin's Formula 4s and stuff like that, turning a few wrenches here and there, but nothing to say that I knew anything. And, we put this thing together, and we had some old cup cars or bush cars that my dad had bought for the Grand Prix that had some gauges. So, okay, we'll take those gauges out, put them in the truck. So we kind of get the truck somewhat together with what knowledge we have, which isn't much. And we take it to Danny, and Danny's like, okay. He says, so we're like, hey, we're going to get it set up and, get it ready to go. And he looks at it, and he says, all right, well, he says, it's not going to be that easy. I said, well, why not? He says, well, you got everything wrong. I'm like, what do you mean we got everything wrong? He says, there's 3 L's in racing. He missed every one of them. Low, light, and left. And you got everything wrong. You got it right and high, So he's like, we got a lot of work to do. And this was probably March, and we didn't hit the track till June or July of that year. And I think we only raced a handful of times. And I think I won, I don't know, two or four races or something like that. But the first time we finally got the truck out there, I was out in the third groove somewhere, I guess, and ended up finding my line. But one thing my dad always told me I never was scared. So he says, I got to give you credit. You're definitely not scared. So, and then when I was in the truck, we had a really great truck. We had a really great motor. Nat had built the motor at the time. Really, nobody was getting motors built like that. And so, we had good stuff compared to the competition. The motor never broke. A lot of guys' motors were breaking, but we had a lot of knowledge behind us. Rick Harris and Billy Clark and Bill Benz, they all knew these 4 cylinders pretty well. So we were taking, motors out of heads off of mail trucks and motors out of Monzas and being able so we could bolt a small block Chevy bell housing up against it, and had a better clutch than a normal S10 clutch. And so it's a Chevy motor, but it wasn't an S10 motor. And same thing with the rear ends. We had Danny Fournier and his brother who used to help the old blue there, Lenny Bowler. Danny Fournier's brother used to be the rear end and transmission guy. So we had a lot of people that had a lot of knowledge, helping us out. And, we did, it was pretty quick right off the truck. And, the next season I went out and we won 8 out of the first 11 races. And the thing was just fast. It was really bad fast. And, my dad would kind of say, well, why are you going so high around everybody? I'm like, well, if they're too wide in front of me, what do I got to do? I got to go around them. And we were fast enough to do it. And, the trucks were really just getting going at that point. It was 2000. It was not even, it was 90, 97, 98. I don't know when they started. Maybe they started 94, 95, something like that. So there wasn't very many trucks. That truck ended up going on to Nick Macedonio, and then Mike Cavallaro, I think, ended up with that truck and won a bunch of races, I believe, and a championship or 2 in that same truck. So it was just one of those perfect situations where you build a car, and sometimes you build a car and they just go. And that truck just went, and it always went. And, you could build a duplicate of it, and it might not go as well. And sometimes you just, Vinny had always said that. Vinny says, sometimes you just get a car that just works. And even John McKenna, same thing. You can build 2 of the same cars, and one works and one doesn't go as good. And sometimes you get it right, and there's no rhyme or reason, Yeah.
We've seen that a lot of time and time again. What stands out as the biggest accomplishment or your favorite memory?
I think it's just the people, like being able to get great friendships out of it with Ronnie and Gary and Jeff, and that experience with it. My dad being involved in it, my grandfather being involved in it, my kids coming and loving and watching. I think that's probably most of it. Being able to win races obviously is to me was the initial accomplishment, trying to be able to win. And we ran pro stocks in 98 or 99, and I won a race at Thompson. I won a race at Lee, and a lot of learning experiences at those 2 tracks. And I always told Gary, you got the best of me, and my dad got the worst. My dad ended up spending a lot of money for me to learn. And and Ronnie was a good contributor to that. He was able to being a former driver, he was able to help me understand certain things that I was either doing right or doing wrong, or certain situations, and, how to handle them better. I remember one year we won a bunch of races, first race of the year, last race of the year, a couple of longer races. And, I think we'd won 5 or 6 races that year, but the only thing we hadn't won is the championship, and I've never, I always went out to win races and figured, you win enough races, eventually the championship will kind of fall into place. But for those guys and for me, at some point I had to change kind of how I was doing things, because Ronnie's like, hey, how'd we do this year? And I'm like, he says, we won the first race, won the last race, won a bunch in between. He said, but what's the only thing we didn't win? And we hadn't won the championship. And he's like, yeah, to do that, he says, we got to be consistent and finish more races towards the front, and so in some ways I tried to be like, I guess the guys I grew up watching, which is Freddie and Ricky. Like, those are the 2 guys I really grew up watching that won a lot of races, John Tripp and Bob Tripp and guys like that. But really it was, Ricky was the guy. Vinny, watched him win a bunch of races and growing up. And Ricky and Fred have always been guys that stormed to the front, and let me tell you, every time I try to storm to the front, I end up wrecked. So I just don't do it because it doesn't work out for me. And so, they can do things in cars I can't do. And I feel like from a natural driving ability, those guys hands down have me beat. And I'm fortunate to work with good people that make cars go for me to be able to drive them the way I need to drive them. And I'm able to tell them what I need done, and they're able to make it happen. But, I think that, I think prime for prime, I think, those guys still can drive circles around me to a degree. And it's just the way the cards fall. Even Fred said it one year, we're running against each other for the championship. And he's like, hey, he always says, hey kid, he says, hey kid, you know as well as I do that it doesn't really matter who has the fastest car or any of that. He says, it's who doesn't have to come up the tunnel at all, during the race. And that's really what it boils down to. There's been, championships won and lost by a race here or there, a couple spots here or there. And, so it's one of those where, it's definitely stressful to run for the championships versus just running for race wins. But, it's just something that you kind of go there and you're going there every week. And it's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to win races or win the championship. So we won our first championship without winning a race. I think it was 2004 with the good years. And so that was, it was just one of those years. It wasn't like I didn't try to win a race. It just didn't happen, and sometimes I had to learn to be able to finish the races. I had to learn to kind of settle in and run where the car was capable of running. So.
Do you still have any goals, any benchmarks that you still want to hit, so you come out of the gate? It's not so much as winning the championship this year, because that's everybody's goal. But if there's something out there, if you will, that you're still chasing.
Not that I'm aware of, I guess. I think it's kind of shifted more to, in a way, kind of like I've seen Rick kind of shift to where he's more fan appreciative over the years as the years have gone on. And I think it's kind of similar for me, where it's like, I like seeing, watching people come in and do well and compete. And I mean, I still am competitive. We all are. That's why we do it. We have a competitive fire. I can't say that there's any goals. I mean, when they were doing that 10,000 win race, I really wanted to win that, and we were well on our way and the motor blew up. But, the positive of that is it blew up on a non-points race, versus a points race. So, some guys can tell you every race and things. And I remember some. My memory is not the best, even in general. But, I think it's just the same old goal. Like, I don't generally look too far ahead. I kind of show up for that week and, go into that week going, okay, I want to finish. And that's the first goal. And the second goal is finish top 10 and then top 5 and then top 3 and try to get the win. And that's kind of how I look at each week. And, I'd much rather to a degree, the seasons be because it is stressful to a degree, and it's a lot of time commitment. With the kids getting older and being able to go on vacation and go places, I enjoy having a week off from a time standpoint each month, because we can go to the Cape and enjoy the beach and things with the kids. So that part of it is nice. But listen, I definitely not. I don't know. I like showing up. I like hearing the sounds, the smell, being in the car, knowing that I can make it go fast, and I'd probably have a bunch more speeding tickets if I didn't race. So, it's. I definitely enjoy a lot of that aspect. Like, would I miss not driving a race car? Absolutely. Do I love some of the stuff that goes along with it, and I think we got a good group of drivers now. I think we have not that we didn't before, but I'm just saying I think it's gotten to a point where everybody's kind of there's a good amount of respect. It's not not a lot of drama, not a lot of you hate me and you hit me, I'm going to hit you, and a lot of this stuff back and forth. It's everybody understanding that they have expensive pieces of equipment, and that sometimes mistakes happen, and when those mistakes happen, it's trying to own up for it. And I've always tried to do that. Anytime I feel like I'm wrong, I'll go and tell the person I'm wrong. If I take somebody out on warn somebody, don't hit me again, and I'm going to take you out on purpose, then I hold my thing. Like, I drive everybody how I want to be driven, and I think that's just my ultimate goal, is to just go out, have fun, race with people that I enjoy racing with, and we're all doing it for hobby. None of us are going to go race professionally on next what is it called, Sprint Cup or whatever it's called now, Monster Cup, I guess, anytime soon. And so the idea is to something fun to do on a Saturday night and enjoy our time, and I want to win as much as the next guy. Everybody in that pit area shows up wanting to win. I mean, it's kind of how it is, and I think that's what keeps you showing up, is that drive to win that week.
Doug, you got anything to add? You've been quiet over there.
Yeah, no, I mean, Kevin touched on it, any goals you have going forward, but what about just this upcoming season? What are you looking forward to when we finally do get underway? It's going to be an abbreviated season in some form or fashion, you'd imagine, but how do you kind of approach this season coming up with everything that's been going on?
Well, I think for me, it's a little bit with everybody. I mean, it's kind of a question mark if what it's going to look like and when we go, and what kind of stipulations and rules are going to be in place. And I have the cars, I have the equipment ready to go. It's with the pandemic and I call it the Rona thing going on, puts the businesses at a little bit of a tough spot, personally, as well. And so, it's really going to depend on my entire environment around me, what my race season looks like to a degree. We have things ready to go. We already had stuff ready to go kind of before this hit, and when the businesses were still doing their normal business and stuff like that. So, I think that it could be a one race at a time type of season for me to a degree, or Gary included. I mean, it's kind of affected everybody, and in some sort of ways. I know we want to get racing, but then in the back of my head, I'm looking at who else is affected, or who else is affected to the point that like racing isn't necessarily on that top priority list. So for me right now, my top priority list is keeping people employed and making sure that they have food on their tables and that they're able to kind of make it through this. And I'm keeping people working that, realistically, if I close the businesses down, I could save even more money. But, my first thought is I need to keep them employed because they, like me, have families. So it's, we are getting stuff ready. We are looking at, making sure that things are ready to go. I am anxious to drive the car, but the same side of it, it's kind of secondary to everything else going on at this point. But if we get out there, and when we get out there, I think it's the same thing that I'm going into this season with a similar set of rules as last season. And I think everybody is going to step up their game, and everybody's going to get a little quicker, and hopefully we can as well. And sometimes it's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Richard Petty always said he'd rather be lucky than good. Throughout my racing career, there's definitely been a lot of instances of that, and so hopefully we can kind of keep that going. So,
you got
David, No, I was just going to say, Dave, thanks for spending some time. I really appreciate it. It's been a great time talking to you this afternoon.
Thank you. I appreciate it, guys.
Well, thank you once again, Dave, for coming on with us, and we hope everyone at home enjoyed this episode of 75 years of speed, celebrating 75 years at Seekonk Speedway. We hope to have you guys join us on our next episode, and look forward to talking to you later this season, Dave.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
David, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.